Hello dear friends, you are on the Ruslan Bailov channel, where we daily review what is happening on the Ukrainian front. Trump is preparing to transfer long-range missiles to Ukraine. A blackout has struck the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and now, after a Russian strike, another blackout has occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. What is happening? Where is the world heading? Meanwhile, the battles on the front continue, and we continue to analyze the situation together with you. So friends, as I promised, in these days I will dedicate a release to the results on the front for September. Let's see what was achieved, what failed, where advances took place, and how successful they were. We will begin from the north and gradually move south. Sumy region. I must state that in September the armed forces of Ukraine achieved more progress here than the Russian side, effectively winning the battle in this sector. What happened? Russian forces pressed on Unakivka and advanced slightly further west, and that was all. The Ukrainian army, in turn, pushed back Russian units west of Konstantinivka, advancing 3 kilometers. They also managed to move forward by 600 m near Alexeyevka and retook a section of forest north of Sadki. So this is the only sector where the Ukrainian side finished the month with a clear advantage. Why did this happen? I already explained, the Russian command withdrew more than half of its manpower from this sector, 70% to be precise, and redeployed them to more important areas in Donetsk region. Here remained only those troops capable of holding the line in defense. That is why in October we will likely see a similar picture. In other words, no significant advances are to be expected. Kharkiv region. Here the Ukrainian forces also had some successes, but much smaller compared to Russian progress. They managed to push Russian troops back from Lyman toward Luhansk. Russian units, meanwhile, expanded their zone of control by 1.5 kilometers along the Travianske Reservoir. On the Vovchansk axis, they advanced 1.5 kilometers deeper into the Tatar forest and also began storming operations in the southern part of Vovchansk. On the Milov bridgehead, the Ukrainian army pushed Russians back by 1.5 kilometers near Katne. But at the same time, note the scale of Russian progress in this sector. The depth of advance reached 5 kilometers, with the width of the controlled area expanding almost 15 kilometers. They also managed to close the gap between Stroivka and Kamenka, with an advance of 3.5 kilometers, and sealed the pocket between Kamenka and the Zalivny forest. The most significant event of the month was, without doubt, the Kupiansk area. At the beginning of September, Russian forces had not entered Kupiansk itself and were still positioned on its northern approaches. Now battles are taking place in the central part of right bank Kupiansk. To the east, Russian forces also advanced nearly 5 kilometers from Stepova Novoselivka toward Petropavlivka. Overall, during September, Russian forces in Kharkiv region took under control 111 square kilometers, while Ukrainian forces recaptured 10. This means that the net gain for Russia was just over 100 square kilometers. This is an incredible leap compared to August, when Russian forces in this region managed only 24 square kilometers. Thus, the pace of advance increased fourfold. Luhansk region. Look at this section of the Kremina forests. It was cleared in September. That red line you see marks the boundary of Luhansk region. The advance here was massive, 11.5 kilometers. In total, in September, Russian forces captured 46 square kilometers, while Ukraine recaptured nothing. Donetsk region. On the Lyman axis, the villages of Sredny, Shandry-Holov, Derilov and the town of Zarekny were taken. The offensive toward Lyman continues, with the front line now significantly closer. From Zarekny, the road toward the city is already open. On the other bank of the Zherebets River, all forests were cleared and Russian forces entered Yampil. Significant progress also occurred in the Siversk sector. At the start of September, there was no talk of surrounding the city. Now, however, the front line has closed from the north and south, creating a blockade. This became possible thanks to forces freed up after the Kremina forests were cleared. On the Kramatorsk axis, between Chasiv Yar and Siversk, Russian forces advanced across a 10-kilometer wide sector, with progress ranging from 600 mpm to 3.5 kilometers. In contrast, the Chasiv Yar area saw no changes at all, not even 100 mpm of movement in September. Likely the assault brigades there are exhausted and undergoing replenishment. On the Konstantinivka axis, the pace also slowed compared to previous months, since Russian forces are now practically at the city itself. They cleared the pocket between Alexandro-Shultsina and Predtekine, advancing 8.5 kilometers. They also entered the garden settlement of Yagodka, considered part of the city, and brought most of it under control. On the Dnipropetrovsk axis, battles raged all month with mixed results. The Ukrainian side recaptured Velika Novosilka, pushed Russian units back near Boykiv, and drove them north of the salient back to Kucheryev Yar. Russian troops, for their part, captured part of Zoloty Kolodez, as well as Novoye Shakovo, Ivanivka, and entered Mertsalove. They also expanded their zone of control near Shakovo from both east and west. As a result, the Ukrainian garrisons in Shakovo, Sofiyivka, and Velika Novosilka are now in operational encirclement, since only one exit road remains, and Russian forces are positioned less than 2 kilometers from it, keeping it under fire control. Near Mirnohrad, progress was modest. Only a small section on the eastern approaches was taken. Similarly, on the Pokrovsk axis, the front remained mostly static. With the capture of Udakna and minor improvements near Kotlin, reports indicate Russian aviation has begun striking Hryshine with glide bombs, likely preparing to cut the highway. If that happens, Pokrovsk will be doomed. On the Novopavlivka axis, Russian forces captured Moravka. In southern Donetsk region, they cleared Oleksandrograd and secured the entire south of the region. Then they moved into Dnipropetrovsk region, summing up Donetsk region. In September, Russian forces captured 273 square kilometers, while Ukrainian forces reclaimed 28. Dnipropetrovsk region. Here, the maximum advance in depth reached nearly 15 kilometers. 9 settlements were captured in 1 month. For comparison, in Donetsk region, 10 settlements were captured. Already in October, 1 more settlement has been taken, Verbov, where on October 1st, Russian soldiers of the Vostok group raised flags in several parts of the village. This was the 16th settlement in this region to fall. Next targets are likely Vishnev and the Pokrovsky-Julipole highway. In September alone, Russian forces took 124 square kilometers in this region, while Ukrainian forces retook nothing. Zaporizhzhia region. Here the pace of advance increased tenfold compared to August. If in August, Russian troops captured only 8 square kilometers in this region, in September they took more than 80. This was largely due to the activity of the Vostok group. The front was pushed forward 7.5 kilometers and 3 settlements were captured. The ultimate target here is the city of Julipole. Some progress also occurred near Kharkiv, where the line of contact was moved 2 kilometers westward, and further south Russian units advanced into Primorska and entered Stepnohirsk. Ukrainian forces managed very small counter-advances here, reclaiming just 1.5 square kilometers near Stepov. Overall results: September became the best month of the year for Russian advances. In total, 635 square kilometers were taken under Russian control. This is the highest result not only of 2025, but since spring of 2024. The Ukrainian army, for its part, retook 44 square kilometers, which, ironically, is also their best monthly result of the year. Still, the comparison is striking, 635 against 44. Such are the results of September. I hope you enjoy these reports filled with numbers and statistics. Now let us turn to the most recent events of the last day. Julipole axis. This is currently one of the most dynamic sectors. In the area of Poltavka, Russian troops secured the eastern outskirts of the settlement. Yesterday, the entire triangular area marked in red on the map came under Russian control. Today, new confirmations show that Russian forces expanded west of Olhivska and aligned the front line along the eastern edge of Poltavka. As a result, new territories, including the southeastern part near Poltavka, came under Russian control. The advance here reached 2.5 kilometers. It is also reported that Ukrainian positions came under attack on the northern approaches to Poltavka, while Russian assault units pushed deeper into the eastern quarters of the settlement. By the end of the week, significant changes are expected here. Strikes are already being recorded on Novovasilivska and Novonikolayevka. while all supply roads leading toward Poltavka remain under the fire control of Russian FPV drones. In addition, Russian forces expanded their influence west of Novoivanivka, gaining another 1.5 kilometers of territory. There are also reports that Novokhrihorivka has been taken, though these remain unconfirmed. It should be remembered that such information is often verified with a delay of 1 or 2 days, as was the case with Verbov. Regarding Verbov, new video materials appeared today on Telegram showing Russian troops openly raising national flags, confirming full control over the settlement. Over the past 24 hours, Russian forces advanced about 500 m here. They are now pressing forward toward Alexeyevka, Privolye, and Vishnev. All of these settlements are under attack by FPV drones and Russian FAB glide bombs. As a result, the entire area marked in red on the map has been fully cleared and secured by Russian troops. The offensive in this sector continues and remains successful. Now to the Pokrovsk direction. Fresh reports indicate heavy clashes on the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk, particularly in the multi-story residential districts. Additional information notes the activity of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups in the city center, which so far remain undetected. There are claims that the western districts of Pokrovsk have been cleared up to the line of Zakiznikiv-Ukraini Street, with all territory west of it under Russian control. However, this data is contradictory, as some of it comes only in the form of news reports, so no changes are yet reflected on operational maps. On the Dnipropetrovsk salient, the situation has worsened sharply for Russia. Ukrainian forces launched a successful counterattack, driving Russian troops out of Dorozhny and Nikonarivka, putting the Russian grouping here in a critical situation. Velika Novosilka also remains under Ukrainian control, and the prospect of encirclement for the entire Russian force in this salient is becoming increasingly real. Reports also state that the western outskirts and much of Novoye Sharkovo are now held by Ukrainian troops. Confirmations have also come from Petrovka, Rubezhna, and Zolotiy Kolodez. All of this zone is currently under the control of Ukrainian assault groups. On the other hand, Russian forces continue applying pressure from the Poltavka axis, striking towards Sharkovo, Velika Novosilka, and Sofiyivka. All three settlements are under close observation by Russian FPV drones. In the area of Kucheryev Yar, Ukrainian units are counterattacking in an effort to push Russians out. The fighting here is especially fierce, with both sides having deployed more experienced units, making this one of the hottest points along the entire front line. If Ukraine manages to stabilize the situation and encircle the Russian grouping in the Dnipropetrovsk salient, they will be able to hold Pokrovsk much longer. But if Russia seizes the initiative and prevents encirclement, the fall of Pokrovsk and its eventual isolation could become critical for the Ukrainian side. Now to the Konstantinivka direction. Here, no significant changes have been recorded. Fighting continues around Klebenbeek, though there are no confirmed reports of full Russian control. It is only known that battles are taking place along the southern part of the reservoir and near Alexandro-Kalinove. In the area of Pleshcheyevka, earlier reports claimed Russian forces entered the southern outskirts and attempted to expand southwest, but no confirmation has been received. Meanwhile, Nelipivka is fully secured by Russian forces, and assaults on Predtekin continue, though without success so far. Ukrainian troops also launch counterattacks toward Alexandro Shultino and Stupochki, but without major results. As for Maiske, Markove, and Nova Markove, reports of their capture by Russian forces appeared more than once, but no confirming evidence has ever surfaced. This suggests that some reports sent up the chain of command may be exaggerated. On the Siversk axis, Russian forces are advancing along the railway towards Zvanivka. Reports have already surfaced of strikes on Ukrainian positions in the northern part of the settlement, as well as movement from the direction of Vyemka. If confirmed, the southern part of Zvanivka would already be under Russian control. The loss of this settlement would essentially open the way for Russian troops to the southern outskirts of Siversk. Some sources even claim fighting on the very outskirts of the city, though such reports appear premature. Should the current gains be confirmed in the coming days, the entire pocket may fall under Russian control, cutting off Ukrainian supply routes to Siversk from the direction of Reznikivka. This is a key supply line. Once Russian troops secure Zvanivka, This road will fall under both fire and physical control, leaving only one viable supply route from Lyman. Now let us turn to Dronivka. Here, Russian forces are reported advancing on the northern outskirts, essentially reaching the settlement from the direction of the Serebryansky forest, which recently came fully under Russian control. The latest video evidence confirms activity from this axis, showing an advance of around 500 m in the last 24 hours. The entire red-marked zone reflects changes from recent days, with no new gains today. As for Yampil, the situation there is extremely tense. It is reported that half the settlement is already under Russian control, with reinforcements and supplies being brought in to continue the assault. The fall of Yampil would be a critical blow to Ukraine, since it opens access to the main supply road to Siversk. The alternative route through Reznikivka is poorly built, not fully paved, and will become nearly impassable once autumn rains set in. In effect, the fate of Siversk depends on holding Yampil. If Ukrainian troops fail to stabilize the line, Siversk and the surrounding area could be lost by year's end. Moreover, capturing Yampil would open the way for Russian troops to the southern outskirts of Lyman, which is already nearly isolated from the north. At present, Lyman's lifeline depends solely on the road from Sloviansk. If that route comes under Russian fire control, Lyman too may end up cut off and eventually fall. Moving on to the Krasno-Lyman axis. Reports indicate Russian advances in the area of Derilov and attacks on Ukrainian positions in Novoselivka and Drobyshev. It is also reported that reserves are being brought forward and forces regrouped to prepare for a new offensive. Active storming operations may begin within the coming week. For now, however, claims of full Russian control over Derilov remain unverified, with no visual confirmations despite statements from the Russian Ministry of Defense. Otherwise, the front line here remains largely unchanged. Thank you for your attention. We will continue monitoring developments. See you next time.